Okay, let's deal with the case of Sweden. Of course, I won't be going so detailed as I did in the case of UK, but still, it would be interesting to see what how the process of nation building and democracy occurred in the case of Sweden. So let's start with the Swedish history. In the 15th century, it started with the creation of Riksdag, which happened after Swedes throughout the Danes, which is a relatively smaller country but still more powerful Vikings. So once the Danes are thrown out, they created this uh, body called Reichstag, which is similar to what Parliament is in the case of UK. The Reichstag, by 1600, Reichstag consists of four estates. They are nobility, clergy, Borgare, and farmers. Borgare is the Swedish equivalent of bourgeois. The word "bor" comes from Latin, which is castle, and basically Borgare means town people. Bourgeois means town people, which comprises of working class, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and so on. So these four estates constituted Reichstag, and they participated in the discussion of Reichstag. Then we see in 1809, after the Napoleonic War, Sweden becoming constitutional monarchy, which means the similar to UK, it is constitutional monarchy, but that means they had king and Reichstag existing simultaneously, but it's the Reichstag also had a say in the legislation. So this introduced, they had a foreign king from 1818 to 1844 after the Napoleonic War. It was ruled by a French king by name Jean Baptiste Bernadotte. He brought in French liberal values. He introduced French liberal values in Sweden, and that has also constituted democratic formations in Sweden, in the case of Sweden. The next thing we see is industrialization of Sweden, similar to UK. Of course, it did not have such vastness and such in-depth industrialization as it occurred in UK's case. Sweden did not have such in-depth or vast as in the case of UK, but still it did have some industrialization. UK, on the other hand, was much more quickly transformed from agriculture country to industrialized countries. Whereas in the case of Sweden, even there was a bit of industrialization, and there were Democratic Working Party which came, it started in 1889, and so so we see there is a coexistence of there was a working class, but at the same time there were also farmers who were relatively powerful. This led to what we call politics of compromise in Swedish history. What this basically tells us is any piece of legislation, mm, you see, whenever any piece of legislation introduced in Reichstag, you see people from different parties supporting such legislation. So that has been an important part of Swedish culture that any legislation should reflect or get approval from the major interest groups of the society. So you see those four estates which started in 1600: nobility, clergy, bogare, and farmers. Similarly, getting reflected in even in the politics of compromise, where you need to um, represent the major interest of the society in your legislation. Yeah, it might be a slow, it might take some time for any legislation or policy to pass, but it does have approval of major interest groups of the society in legislation. That has been one of the um, major uh, feature of Swedish um, society or Swedish politics. So that's one of the thing. One other important aspect of Swedish history is the sovereignty through neutrality. So Sweden has seen the smaller country which has sided with any group, the fate of those countries, what happened to them during the Second World War. So it decided to stay neutral. So does that mean Sweden is pacifist? No. Sweden is armed to the teeth. It has 2% of the gross national product spent on the defense, which is high in the context of Europe. Of course, it's not same as US. US has 5 to 6% of GDP spent on the defense, but in the context of Europe, that's relatively high. So that means they are armed to the teeth since they didn't side with any group. They are they want to uh, maintain that neutrality by arming themselves heavily. The another feature which also shows this neutrality is Sweden never joined the NATO group because they didn't want to upset the Eastern Europeans, the Soviets, and other Eastern European countries. So that shows, like, they don't want to upset the Eastern European by joining the NATO, which represents Western European. So that also um, shows the Sweden's neutrality and how they want to maintain sovereignty through neutrality. And there is also, I'm sure, some politics also comes into picture. The geopolitical scientist might say that if you look at the location of Sweden, it's by the side of a so-called superpower, former Soviet Union, former superpower, and then you have Germany. So it's the location also, uh, might have influence in their being neutral without saying any of the groups. And it's also another feature which shows their neutrality is it was late to join the European Union. It didn't jump into the European Union. In fact, Sweden became member of European Union in 1996. That also showed that yeah, they are part of EU, but again they are not so much active in EU. So that's pretty much some of the features of Swedish history and how nation building. It also shows a bit of nationalism of Sweden, as we see in throwing out things. So we basically see how Swedish nation formation and democracy developed in the case of Sweden, and this week we also saw how it developed in the UK. So pretty much we have seen how nation formation and democracy occurred in UK, in the UK and in the Sweden. Um, so we have two European countries which uh, in a way had a similar way of nation formation, like how you have Reichstag in Sweden, you have Parliament in UK, but at the same time, in one's case, in the case of UK, it's much more earlier and much more nuanced in nation formation and democracy than Sweden. So that's where I spend much more time in UK as against the Sweden. But nevertheless, it would be an interesting comparison to see two Western European countries and how nation formation and democracy occurred in these two countries. Um, so we will meet on Monday to discuss the next week topics, and that concludes this week's online video, and hope you should be able to answer the quiz and stay warm.